This is Pastor Jeff Chavis. I'm the pastor of Church Online. We're a unique online community of faith. You can find us online at churchonline.com, but we spell that uniquely CHRCH because we say all that's missing is you. Of course, yesterday was the birthday of our country. I hope you celebrated it well. But what you may not know is July the 4th is also an anniversary of one of God's greatest answered prayers, something that has just importance to the very foundation of our country. But I have a feeling that many of us may not know the story. And by the way, I'm not this great expert in history. This is from a book called 100 Verses That Made America Great by Robert Morgan. And it all started in June the 27th, 1887. So after the American Revolution, after the Declaration of Independence, the nation was reeling from the revolution, but trying to begin as this new nation. So 236 years ago, this constitutional convention was called with the leaders of this young nation, leaders whose names we probably recognize. They could not agree on anything. Well, they could agree on one thing. They all agreed that George Washington should be the chairman of this constitutional convention and ultimately the leader of this country. But the arguing was fierce. They had no idea how to settle these arguments, how to change things, and how to start this country from scratch, essentially. An old man got up that day, an old man, again, whose name should sound really familiar. It was 81-year-old Benjamin Franklin. Everyone, of course, had great respect for Ben Franklin. And just so you know, Ben Franklin is not necessarily known for his piety, but many people think in his later years he came back to the faith. But I want you to listen to these words that he spoke on that June day in 1787. He said, "In the beginning of this contest with Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayers in this room for divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. All of us who were engaged in this struggle must have observed frequent instances of the superintending providence in our favor." Now, I know that those are some flowery words, we might say, but what Ben Franklin was trying to say was, do you remember in this room, in the same place where this country and our Declaration of Independence was born, we prayed every day, and all of you know, all of you had seen the hand of God at work in your life. Now he concluded with this statement: "I have lived long, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see to this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, it is probable that an empire can rise without his aid." In these sacred writings, sir, in the sacred writings, sir, it says, "Except the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain, those who build it." Of course, Ben Franklin quoting from Psalm 127, which I want to read to you. But his concluding remarks were, look, if God has answered our prayers, and the older I get, the more I see that that's true, then how could we possibly build this nation without him? Now, of course, the great miracle in the story is, after a few days, they were released for prayers, and the answer was on July the 4th, 1787, the anniversary of this event, when they came back together, and it seemed literally came back together. Their hearts were changed. The Reverend William Rogers prayed for the work that they had. James Madison would reflect on those days, and he would say, "It is impossible for the man of pious reflection not to perceive the finger of God in the almighty hand that has so frequently and signaled the extent of our relief in the critical states of this revolution." In other words, God indeed answered their prayers. They came together. The Constitution was born. But that verse, Psalm 127 became really important to them. And I want to read the whole thing. It's only 5 verses, but let me read this to you. It says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for God has given his beloved sleep. Behold, the children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. Happy is the man who is quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but shall speak with their enemies in the gate." This psalm, of course, speaks of the future. Pardon me, speaks of children. And we got to know that those early framers of the Constitution were indeed concerned about the future, about children, about what's coming down the road. But the conclusion is there at the first part. Unless the Lord is building it, our labor is in vain. Just think of that. Think of the significance of the founding fathers in that statement. But how about personally? Do we give control of our lives, our businesses, our families, yes, our future? Are we giving them to Him? Are we allowing Him to build those things? I have a feeling that in the same way, and this is such a great lesson for us, in the same way that those framers of the Constitution recognized how they had relied on God in the past and He answered their prayers, that God indeed answered their prayers moving into the future. And there's no way this constitutional convention was going to do its work without the work of God and without God leading and guiding. So what about us? What about us today? Are there parts of our life where, I don't know, maybe there's some contention, some strife, some challenges, but maybe it was different in the past. Maybe we saw God's hand at work in all kinds of ways. Well, maybe it's time today to do as those founding fathers did. Pause. Maybe spend the weekend in prayer, maybe fasting and prayer, and just put this thing, this situation, this business plan, this family plan, whatever it might be, put it into His hands and watch how God could do things more than we could ever ask or imagine.